Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Dentistry Decoded podcast, the podcast where we keep you in the know of everything digital dentistry. This episode is straight on the back of IDS. I just got back from IDS, and we have a special guest. He's been on the podcast many times, and he's like a digital guru at Dentsply Sirona. This is Max Milz, the head of the global business unit. Max, thank you again for joining me.
Ahmad, good to see you again. It's just been a couple of days, but looking forward to catching up with the real digital guru, right?
Yeah, something like that, man. Something like. How have you been anyway? How's everything post IDS? You guys had a busy time, and I think it's been a busy couple of months for the whole industry.
Yeah, IDS is always, kind of this huge event that everybody's looking forward to. Everybody puts on their best clothes, puts out their new stuff and so forth. So you can imagine the run up to it is pretty intense for everyone. And then everybody's like, okay, let's hope we have a really awesome booth. Let's hope it's really crowded. Let's see what everybody else is doing. And then it's just an intense week, right? Because I think this year there were 135,000 visitors again. So it's almost pre-COVID levels again. 2,000 exhibitors. And you were there. There's just so much amazing stuff. And it's all about making it work together. So I think it's been awesome, but also tiring. I'll admit that.
I feel that, man. It was definitely an intense IDS. And yeah, it's one of those things, this is why I love talking to people like you in industry and in these companies. You get an interesting perspective. I don't think people realize how much effort and work goes into these booths. I can't imagine, A, how much money you spend, and B, how much manpower it takes to get this thing going.
Yeah, we had, I think, 250 people working at our booth, right? So, and it was crowded every single day. So afterwards, it's really people are like, whoa, now let's make sure we don't all get sick, So it's also people, you can see the sparkle in people's eyes. You can see the passion. People are so proud of their products, of what they're doing. So happy to talk with customers, to finally see everything come to fruition that they worked for. And then hope for, of course, good results.
For sure. Now, speaking of ideas, before we get into the rest of the podcast, because I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of digital today. What was your overall impression? As you mentioned, the numbers are good. I think this was as busy as I remember. Not quite pre-COVID levels, but really encouraging. The buzz was amazing. People were interested, excited. Like you say, you could see it on people's faces. Everyone was just happy to be there. What was your overall impressions of the entire event?
I thought it was an excellent event. I think if you look at the themes of what was coming out there, obviously there was a lot of scanners, a lot of 3D printing. But I think that the biggest thing is that the movement to the cloud and to AI is now really becoming industry standard. And I think that's different than what you saw 2 years ago at the last IDS, when, we were kind of the first ones to say, hey, we're going full cloud. And everybody's like, okay, why are you doing that? And now it really kind of caught on. And you see everybody's kind of racing towards building platforms, bringing it together, working together with others, and seeing how software and AI differentiates the equipment and the workflows. Because at the end of the day, people care about how do you do better dentistry, right? How do you grow your practice? How does it make your operations more efficient? And how do you get great patient outcomes? So I think there's really a convergence of themes. And that's also why I think there wasn't a single kind of standout innovation, but it's more, I think the theme is better together, integrating things together, seeing also partnerships is a big theme. And then there are always nuggets, which are unique, right? So for us, that's the MRI, for example, where we got a lot of attention, how to use the technology in dental, the integration across different pieces of equipment, different workflows, different technologies, and making sure that, you have something that works for the everyday dentist.
Yeah, man, look, you wrapped it up perfectly in a nutshell, basically. Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, look, it was all about platforms and AI. Every single major company is talking about a platform, whether it's Straumann or 3Shape or you guys or iTero and everyone's talking about a platform. I think this is the definite way of the future. Dentistry is going on the cloud. And it's funny you mentioned the MRI. I still think that's mind-blowing. We'll get into that later. That sort of new imaging modality is coming to dentistry, or technically is already here. One other thing that was fascinating to me when I was looking around, and I agree with you, this year at IDS, I don't think there was like one major release, because something that people keep asking me is, what was the coolest thing you saw at IDS? And look, there were some nice products released like Trios 6, etc. But I don't think anything was like really mind blowing. It was progression. It was a lot of progression in the industry. One fascinating thing I saw was this kind of birth of a new printer classification, these pod printers, because Sega making pods now, and that's kind of fascinating. I expect more of those. And lastly, I will say is this photogrammetry buzz about, scanners that can do photogrammetry. We saw obviously Elite with their workflow, True Abutment with 3Shape. Interested to see what you guys are going to do. I know you have your own thoughts about photogrammetry and scanners, but we're also seeing all these companies now. I saw a couple of prototypes, they weren't released, but photogrammetry cameras being installed into intraoral scanners. And to me, why it's really fascinating is it's such a niche part of dentistry. I mean, dentists doing full arch is very niche, I guess clinicians in general, but it's getting a lot of attention for some reason. What are your thoughts about all this full arch stuff?
Yeah, I think I'll pick on both of those topics. I think to a certain extent the buzz always happens a little bit about edge cases, right? Because like you said, full arch is niche, right? Most people don't do any or a lot of them, right? Because they're difficult, right? It's advanced implantology that you have to do. It's not something which is done by the everyday dentist. And photogrammetry is a little bit, it's an aid, right, to compensate for especially scanners that are maybe not as accurate. Because we know from our studies and so forth that, for example, a prime scan is accurate enough to do fully edentulous scanning. People then sometimes have challenges with, is the tissue stitched well enough together? But we know it works, right? And photogrammetry is a little bit kind of a step in between for people who struggle with it, right? And to make it a little bit faster. But then the downside is, of course, you have another step, right? Because at the moment, photogrammetry becomes kind of an elongated scan flag. That's what it is, right? I mean, there are plenty of solutions out there. And I think the real North Star has to be that you don't need to do that. That the scanner itself gives you an accurate enough, a well enough stitched tissue image together so that you cut out that step completely. I think it's really worthwhile and it's a good stepping stone for a lot of people. But I think ultimately, the scanners have to be accurate enough to do that without photogrammetry.
It's one thing that ITERA is saying as well, funny enough, with their Lumina, they came out with a very big claim that, this is as accurate as photogrammetry. And I have to say, a lot of people on the ground, dentists are a little hesitant of claims like this because, for good reasons, whatever scanner it is, there's still a lot of stitching. But I mean, I hear your point that I guess that the North Star is really not having to use any of these products.
Exactly. And I think, there are validated workflows out there. So, for example, PrimeScan and Atlanta Superstructures have a validated workflow where you don't need photogrammetry and to make it work for a complex case. And there are others like that, right? I mean, Trios is a similar accurate scanner as the PrimeScan. So I think those ones you pretty much don't need it. For others, you do need it. But then, of course, it's always a question on technique and how easy do you want things to do and what's your workflow like, right? At the end of the day, dentistry is also a little bit an art, and every artist likes to do things a little bit different, right? So it's which colors do you use and how do you get it done? And I think for the printing side, I think there's a lot of innovation happening. For me, there are kind of two things. The one thing is the entire buzz around printed crowns, which we can talk about a bit more in detail later. And the second thing is we see a lot of people now following with the post-processing, right? When we brought out the Prime Print, the biggest innovation wasn't the printer itself, was the post-processing unit, right? That gives you additional safety, filters out things, automates it, makes sure you don't have to do a lot of manual work. And we see that the first other systems are kind of copying that trend, because the dirty little secret of printing is not the printing, but what you do after you print it. You need to wash, you need to cure, you do it manually. Do you take a toothbrush to clean stuff out? How do you get resin remnants out there? And that, I think, is where a bit of the innovation is also shifting towards, because nobody wants to spend their time cleaning stuff manually. That's just a real time sucker.
I agree. And I mean, I guess another really big topic, of course, was AI, cloud, platforms, etc. You guys have been busy with DS Core. You released a couple of things at IDS, and you guys are getting into more diagnostics. How's DScore going anyway?
I think DScore is really going great, right? So just to give you a couple of stats, we now have around 43,000 practices and labs that use it. There are more than 50,000 devices that are connected to it, and that's not just scanners, but scanners, X-rays, mills, printers. We see that a lot of orders to labs go through the platform now, and you just see that the workflows keep getting built out. 2 years ago and today, it's really like night and day. We've released more than 85 additional functionalities, improvements, and so forth during that time frame. And I had a number of clinicians at our booth that said, well, let me see what you can do now. And they were like, wow. Because, 2 years ago, what was it? It was pretty much cloud storage and a few other functions. And now there's so much more on there. What we released now, specifically this year, was the ability to do X-ray diagnostics directly in DScore. So pretty much from any screen, and we all know the hassle of having specific clients where you can open your X-ray images. Now you can do that pretty much from any screen from your home, in addition to bringing additional AI functionalities in there. In our case, a tooth segmentation that allows you to basically automatically segment teeth, mandibular canals, jaws, and so forth, which really helps you to get a more accurate view of the 3D image. And the other pieces, we did a lot of Prime Scan 2 improvements, right? I mean, one of the topics that some practices struggled with were internet connectivity, and we have halved that, right? So which is a really major step just 6 months after launching it. We've halved the upload speed requirements. So beforehand, it needed a 50 Mbit upload to scan directly into the cloud, and now it's just 25. And that really expands dramatically for everyone who can use their internet to scan directly into the cloud and use all the functions. Plus, there are a bunch of improvements that came out. Caries detection now is available in Europe as well. We added, of course, also accessories. People love the steel sleeve. There's now a steel sleeve for it. People love having a card. There's a card for it now. So it also just shows that the difference of the past and today with cloud-based software is that you just get much faster in deploying and improving things. Now, I'll give you one example. The time between CEREC 5.2 and CEREC 5.3 was roughly 22 months, right? Because, you use your CEREC every day. For DScore, major improvements come every 3 months, right? So it's a dramatic speed improvement. And if you think about the more tricky things like X-ray, a new X-ray software version for us, a major one, 4 to 5 years, right? I mean, we brought out DScore diagnosis with AI segmentation since last IDS, right? So that's 2 years. So you really see the dramatic improvement in terms of getting access to functions and bringing it together. And I think the other big theme that at least I experienced is I had a bunch of people that went to the Dentsply Sirona booth first, because it's one of the go-to booths of IDS, and it's well located right at the entry, so you almost can't miss it. And then you look at it, and then you go and look at everything else. Well, a bunch of people come back and say, I really saw the difference now because your stuff works together, right? Because you could see the scanners, the X-ray images, the printers, the mills, all working in one system. So you really have everything together. Because I think the piece that a lot of people struggle with is you go through IES, you see tons of great innovations, but they're always in a silo. And then that means that a lot of companies kind of outsource the integration problem to the dentist. And you're a super tech-savvy digital guy, you make everything work, but most people are not Ahmad Al-Hassiny, right? So it's really about making sure that you have something that does the integration for you. And I think that's really what this is all about.
You think, you raise a couple of really good points. Obviously, DS is all in on the cloud thing, that's for sure. And that's going to be interesting watching that play out over the next 5 years, because, what's fascinating to me is that, as I mentioned, every single large company now is making a platform. Basically, every single company. And a bit like intraoral scanners, I think this is going to be winner takes all sort of thing, because I don't think there's going to be room for 15 different cloud platforms in dentistry. You know what I mean? I don't think dentists are going to pay for 15 different cloud platforms, let alone their hesitation to pay for one. And I'll be honest, when I see what you guys are doing, I almost see you as way ahead of the curve, really, because I don't know, do you feel like dentists really appreciate the cloud? I still don't see that they do. I don't think they get it. I don't think they get the benefits. I mean, a lot of the times everyone's talking about these features, but I really think it's almost ahead of its time in a way. And you guys are doing the right thing. You have to build it to be ready. But this is just my gut instinct. I genuinely, when I talk to dentists, I don't really see that many people super excited about platforms and cloud. I don't know what you're seeing.
I agree with you. I think ultimately, most people don't care about the technology at all. And the technology should not be in the center of the discussion.
Hmm.
The center of the discussion should be the workflow.
Yeah.
And what the cloud platform like the DS Core become a little bit like the operating system of the practice, right? And nobody talks about Windows or iOS or whatnot. So it's really about moving that to the back and talking about what you can do with it. And I think when you look at platforms in different industries, typically you have two or three, right? It's not just one. It's not completely a winner take all in more kind of industrial or medical settings. But you're right that most people won't use several of them, right? Yes, you need interoperability. But I think if you think about the operating system, there's really going to be two or three that you choose, and then other applications that need to work together with it, right? So that's also, I think, different for DS as in the past, is we have built this in a much more open way, right? We have an integration with 3Shape, for example, on the Trios meets Prime workflows. We have other integrations in the works. And I think that's really the difference, because what's the hub and what's the spoke? And ultimately, the platform itself, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go get myself a platform. They go out and say, hey, I need a better solution for my implantology workflow, or I want to get a scanner. And then the platform is what powers that. So that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way as well. I think, to me, when I think of a cloud platform that's done it ridiculously right, I think of Apple, to be honest. And I feel like the dental company that's going to pull it off as seamless as them is probably going to be the majority winner, because you're totally right. It's all about solutions and workflows. I mean, as a clinician, it's all about what I can do for my patient, how fast I can do it, and at the end of it, what revenue I can make. It's not really about the technology itself.
No, it's about the practice of dentistry, right? And I think Simon Campion, our CEO, said, our ambition is to become the Apple of dentistry. I think that's a nice analogy to say, because with Apple, everything works together. But I think the underlying piece there is really the focus on the clinical workflows. And ultimately, you first need to solve for bread and butter dentistry, right? If you look at what dental practices actually make money with, it's not the fancy all on four stuff and so forth, or even veneers, right? It's first of all, prevention and exams. Secondly, it's endo. Thirdly, it's resto. And then it's simple implants. And when I say resto, it's drill and fill, and then it's crowns, 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 crowns. That's basically where the money in dentistry lies. If you do an estimation, that's 2/3 to 3/4 of dental practice revenue. You have to solve for that first. The other pieces are the sparkly stuff that everybody talks about, right? I mean, for us, for many years on the CEREC system, people are like, oh, can I do veneers with it? And we're like, yes, you can do veneers with it. And then you look at what do people actually do with it? They don't make veneers, they do crowns. The same, right? The same thing is on printers. People say, can I do dentures with it? And you're like, yes, you can do dentures with it. I'll tell you the top 3 indications on printers. It's models. And you're like, why are you printing models? Surgical guides and night guards. Yeah. That's 80 to 85% of things that get printed. Niche applications get an outsized amount of attention. But if you look at what you want to solve for, it's bread and butter dentistry. And that's restorative dentistry first and foremost.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about the restorative dentistry part. So if I was a dentist and you're pitching this cloud and you should get everything on the cloud and use DS Core, how does it help me if I'm just doing drill and fill dentistry and crowns? What's your vision more? I guess that's what I'm asking. So, because I think that's what's lacking. What people don't really get is, how does this help me? All they see is another shiny thing, and I need to pay another subscription. But what's DS's vision? How does this actually improve prevention, restorative, etc.?
I think again, I'll go back to the workflow. Let's play a little game here. Let's talk drill and fill dentistry, Ahmad. What pieces of technology do you use today in order to do a simple drill and fill?
My eyes. No, I'm joking. No, X-ray, of course, and then a handpiece and anesthetic and H prime bond, composite, triple X, etc.
Exactly, right? So drill and fill is a pretty analog piece of dentistry. The only digital pieces that you mentioned is really the X-ray.
Yeah.
So there the question is, if you're doing simple drill and fill on X-ray, the key question is, first of all, which X-ray device do you use, right? You just use intraoral X-ray, you also use extraoral. And what the hell do you do with the data? Where do you diagnose and how do you use it, right? So what the cloud platform does, it basically, first of all, gives you access from any screen. So it simplifies where you can do it. It makes it easier to maintain, and it eliminates the storage problem, right? Because you need to store X-ray images for a long time. So that's a relatively simple use case. Now let's say, what's the next step? Let's say you wouldn't be doing chairside, but you would only work with a lab. What's to do crowns, say? What's the next piece of technology that you would need in order to do that?
A scanner.
It's a scan, right? So, okay, say you're moving from analog resto to now doing resto with a lab. You add a scanner, but you already have your X-ray data in one system, and you can use it from anywhere. If you now add a scanner that's using the same backbone, you don't have to worry about data integration and storage because it's in the same place. It uses the same software interface. It's easier for you to learn. You can visualize both of those things together in the communication canvas, for example, and you can share that data with your patient to say, hey, look, I'm going to give you this data home so you can discuss with your partner. And then it gives you the ability to just send to a lab, chat with them and say, hey, can you make this crown for me until whatever, Wednesday? That's when the patient's coming back. And please make it pretty. And the lab can directly get that workflow into their system, start designing it and making it. So that's the next step, right? So you've now mastered analog restoration and restoration with a lab. So what's the next thing if you're now thinking, well, I really want to do chairside because, there's a reason why there's a mill in Millionaire, because CEREC is just such a great system to increase the profitability of your practice. You've already mastered scanning. You've mastered looking at different scans. What's the next thing you need to integrate to do chairside? It's a CEREC.
A design software to start.
Exactly, design software and a mill. Now, we don't yet have design capabilities in DS Core, but it wouldn't be a surprise if people would expect us to do that at some point, right? But the next thing you do is you integrate the mill into the system. Now, again, the mill needs to get the data from somewhere, and you need to be able to design, and you need to be able to say, well, when is that job done, and was it documented? So you're adding another piece into the system, and now you can do chairside, right? And now you might say, well, I also want to do night guards. So you add a printer. Maybe you say, I'm really ready to do restorations, not just on endo cases, but also on implants. So you want to add implant planning. So you can see that you can take your practice on a journey, expand the range of procedures that you're offering by simply adding another piece of technology that feeds from the same system, has the data in the same place, and works the same way. Because one of the big barriers is also having to learn stuff. Every dental practice is short for time. If everything works in the same way, and I think that's a similarity to why when people use an iPhone, they rather get an iPad than a Microsoft Surface, is because they already know how to use it. The data is in the same place. It's the same account. So it's really about expanding access to the different pieces. And that's kind of the way I would want to see it. You always think about what's the next procedure that you want to add, or where's the efficiency gain that you want to add, and what's the technology you need for it, and how do you most simply integrate in the practice. And that's really the difference, right? Because we like to talk about connected dentistry being the next step or the next phase of digital dentistry. And that's really about breaking down silos so that you can expand practices in a seamless way. And that's a journey. When we're done with DS Core and everything is built out, our ambition is to have all pieces of equipment connected, all workflows on it, resto, implants, aligners, dentures, whatnot. You can work in any way you want to work. You want to work with a lab? Great. You want to get services from the OEM directly, great. You want to work chairside, great. But it's about giving people options in a single space that brings it together. And that's why it's also hard to grasp, because we're not talking about a product and say, what does it do? And you're like, well, it's more the question, what does your practice do? And which functions are most helpful for you to make you a more profitable, more efficient, and better dental practice?
There's a lot to unpack there, my friend. But man, you inspire me every time you talk. You're really inspirational. I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. One thing is obviously the CAD on the cloud. Any sneak peeks of when we can see that? Is that like a 5-year game, 2-year game, 1-year game?
I think it's a near-term game.
Near-term game, super exciting. I mean, once CAD goes on the cloud, that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, and people like to talk about AI. I mean, you're doing CEREC every day. You use crown proposals every day. That's been in the market for, 10 years? That's AI-based crown proposals already right there.
Probably the best AI-based crown proposals, by the way. I mean, it's unbeatable. I think if you give it a good prep, the CEREC does an amazing job.
Exactly, and that's also why our ambition is to bring something into DS Core which leverages the clinical results of that, because every year there are millions of crowns milled based on those proposals, and we know they work because, I mean, CEREC turned 40 this year. It's a little bit older than you, Ahmad, but not much.
8 years old. I just turned 32 yesterday, actually.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Well, congratulations, CEREC 40. That's a massive milestone. Is that counting from CEREC 1?
Yes. 1985, when CEREC 1 was basically brought out in the first wave.
Unbelievable.
Right? So, friends, the real birthday, we think it's 1985.
That's unbelievable, man. And to think how much has changed since then. And, digital dentistry back then would have been some kind of weird voodoo. And now it's mainstream and everywhere in IDS. It's crazy to think. I mean, it was weird voodoo 15 years ago. CEREC 40 years, so there's a lot to think about there. Do you think we're peaking in terms of chairside CEREC? Have we reached as far as we can take it at the moment?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you a little bit why. I think the entire boom of 3D printing actually reignites CEREC, right? Because what's chairside printing about? It's about chairside. The C in CEREC stands for chairside. And if you look at what are the most profitable applications, it's crowns.
Single crown.
Not, right? So I think the barriers to adoption of CEREC were kind of twofold. One is it takes a leap of faith to get into it because it's an expensive system, right? It's highly integrated, but you're looking at a pretty much high expensive outlay. But a lot of people have scanners now, so that journey gets easier. The second thing is that for some reason, people think, oh, this is kind of difficult to use. I don't want to design myself. Now, in reality, we both know that designing single crowns in CEREC is really damn easy. It's click, 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 done, right? But nonetheless, I think it's about lowering those barriers, so making it easier to get into the CEREC journey. And secondly, using AI tools and so forth and deploying them, for example, in DS Core, so that it becomes even easier to learn and to integrate in your practice. Because ultimately, it's one of the most profitable procedures for dental practice. And I think this is no longer about, oh, you can save some money on your lab fees. It's about single visit dentistry. Because patients, I mean, I'm sure your patients love you, Ahmad, but I don't think they want to come to your practice several times to get a crown done. They love coming once, right? Single visit, everybody is short for time. Nobody likes going to the doctor in general. And of course, also for you as a businessman, it's better to get the complete procedure done in one session, write the check, have the money done, and don't have them come back several times, right? Because chairside is money. That's really what it's about. And I think if you look at what now all the 3D printing companies, whether it's SprintRay or Asiga or others are doing, is they're trying to push into single visit dentistry with printed crowns. But ultimately, the king of crowns is CEREC. So I think we'll see, based on innovations that we also have in the making, a second wave of CEREC So we're kind of looking at the next 40 years. That's basically the way we look at it.
I'm going to throw you some curveballs because obviously you've seen my podcast, you've seen who I talk to, and there's a lot of opinions. I mean, I you know me, I love CEREC. I bought 5 or 6 complete units. Every clinic of mine gets a CEREC. But when I talk to others, there's a few things that I commonly hear your competitors say about CEREC, and I'm really curious just to give it to you, and you tell me what you think. So one thing is this common thing, especially the 3D printer companies, they say, you know, look at Dentsply Sirona, they've been trying to push CEREC for 40 years, and they only achieve 15% penetration or something like that. And they're like, see, I mean, printing has already done better than that. It's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. What's your take on that sort of thinking?
I think it comes back to the point earlier to say the CapEx barrier is, I think, one of the biggest hurdles for the adoption of CEREC, right? And we know that the return on investment of a CEREC system is 2-3 years, and then basically it's not printing, but maybe milling money. But that's a big hurdle to overcome, right? Because you're looking at a substantial investment. Printers, especially low-end printers, I mean, they're really, really cheap. But then it's a question, what can you do with them, right? So penetration is the one thing, usage is the other thing, and the third thing is what's the value it brings to your practice. So I think the adoption curve is still growing. Of the systems, we'd say at least half of them are new users, and the push has to be to expand access to chairside dentistry. And I think that's going to continue. If you look at the adoption of scanners, let's take Germany, which is probably one of the heaviest CEREC markets in the world. Only around 27 to 30% of German dental practices have an intraoral scanner.
Crazy.
Right? And if you think about that, probably 20% have a CEREC. Well, everyone has a CEREC as a scanner. So if you think about the scanner, there's always a question on what do you do with the scanner? And the two main applications of why people buy scanners if they want to make money with it is aligners and CEREC. Because the lab workflow is more of an efficiency game rather than this helps you to make more money faster. Because you can send an analog impression to a lab, the lab's going to then digitize it and give you design and a crown. I mean, the lab doesn't like it that you sent them an analog impression because it's more work for them. But at the end of the day, for most dentists in most of the world, sending with a scanner to a lab is mostly an efficiency improvement and not an improvement to their top line.
100%. The other thing with crowns going so cheap now, because crowns are not what they used to be. Before, it used to be like $200-$300 a crown. Now you can get them as cheap as like 50 USD, and that's like in developed markets. Is the equation to buy a CEREC getting harder and harder in people's minds? I mean, to me, it makes sense. It's not really, you said it, it's not really about the lab fee it's more the efficiencies and the chairside workflow. That's why I do it. But do you find there's more resistance now with how cheap lab crowns are?
I don't think it's a major topic because I think it's really about the single visit element of it, right? So if you look at a dental practice, what's the most expensive thing in a dental practice, Ahmad? It's not the equipment. It's you.
Yeah, that's true.
You're the most expensive thing in the dental practice, right? And every minute of your time that you spend not on a patient's mouth doing the things that only a dentist can do, because you're busy having a patient there a second time or a third time, or because you're busy, sending stuff to a lab, right? Which you hopefully delegate to your assistant. And I guess you don't send anything analog anyways these days. But it's really about single visit saves the patient time, saves the dentist time, and gives you often, I would say, even better crown because you prep on site and you can adjust it on site.
Yeah.
And the lab doesn't have to compensate for a poor prep, right? That's the beauty also of the different material choices, right? I mean, talking about materials, I think is probably another element of the entire milling and printing side. But there's been a huge boom in zirconia on mills, right? Printed zirconia is not something you can get out of a resin printer. You can only get that with a mill. And zirconia is a very forgiving material, right? Because if your prep is not so good, you can compensate with more cement. And I think in reality, if you look at the practice of dentistry, especially for younger dentists, prepping is something which is not taught well enough. I know that's an element you also have in your courses. But a bad prep means the lab has to compensate by adjusting the design. On a CEREC with zirconia, you can compensate for a not so great prep with the cement, right? So it's always, if you think about the workflow, you have to think about the machinery, the materials, the cost of the different things, but then it's also about speed and simplicity.
Actually happened to me. I kid you not. Yesterday or the day before, I had a patient. I was doing two crowns, one opposing the other, and that's also a kind of benefit of the CEREC system. Still, some chairside software cannot do two opposing crowns together. But anyway, and it's funny you said that because when you're doing one crown, you can do your occlusal reduction and make sure it's 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeter. But then when you do two opposing ones, your opposing one, because now you don't have a full tooth above, you commonly under reduce that. And so I was scanning it, and then I had to scan it and then check and then go back and adjust some more and check. And you're totally right. If I sent that to the lab by just my eyeball thinking it was correct, that would have been a mess because I was way off with the occlusal reduction on the opposing tooth.
Yeah, and I think these, refinements and reworks, that's the really annoying part of dentistry. Nobody likes that. So I was just gonna hone in a bit on the materials part, right? Because the benefit of CEREC is, of course, we can see what gets milled on CEREC systems, right? And they're kind of largely three material classes. There's lithium, which is dominated by Emax, right? Great material from Ivoclar. There's zirconia, right, where Dentsply Sirona is pretty strong. And then there's also composites, right, which is more the GC space of the world. If you look at different markets in the world, the material usage differs quite a bit, right? In most advanced markets, it's still mostly lithium or Emax. Zirconia is catching up dramatically. We can actually see it. Somebody who has a prime mill tends to mill zirconia more than lithium disilicate. Right? There's a real swap, in particular in Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And then there are markets that use quite a bit of composite, right? Japan is notable for doing a lot of composite crowns, but it's also a thing in some Southern European markets. Now, if you look at these three categories, glass ceramics, so lithium, zirconia, and composite, we have to compare apples to apples. What you get out of a printer is a composite crown with a certain degree of filler. But it's a lower amount of filler than on a composite crown that you can get out of a mill. Most dentists in the world that work chairside prefer glass ceramics or zirconia and only use composites for temp crowns. So then it's really a question on, if composite crowns are so great, why are you not using it on a mill today? Because if you look at the workflow of a printed crown, it's going to take you about half an hour if you include printing, washing, manual work, curing, and so forth. You can get a milled composite crown out of a CEREC in under 5 minutes and you're done. There's nothing else to do, right? There's much less manual work. So it's really a question on which choice of material are you going to use, how fast and simple is the workflow, and what's easiest integrated in the practice. And I think with all the buzz on what's new and sexy and shiny, I think boring is the new sexy, because you have something that's proven and it gives you the complete range of materials to mill from.
So why do you think, obviously let's jump into the milling printing game, because I agree with you. I mean, printing the resin crowns has some advantages. I mean, it is composite at the end of the day with filler in it, and you can obviously mill crowns. I think we both know what the main barrier is. I mean, again, it's the cost thing. Mills are way more expensive than printers. I think this is why printers are so attractive now, because people are getting really excited about being able to print something for around 15,000 US versus having to shell out 30, 40, 50,000 for a mill. I mean, I feel like this is why printing has gotten so much attention. I also have to say the printing workflow is actually way faster these days. With Midas and what Sprint Ray's doing, they're getting it down to about 15 minutes, I would say. The printing time with the capsule thingies, like 7-8 minutes. You wash it and then you cure it for another 5 minutes or so. One thing that you do say, and that's very true, is that the post-processing is totally different for these classes. I mean, with a mill, you mill it, you just cut the sprue, it's ready to rock. And with a printer, I don't think they've figured out the post-processing yet because, you spray it and there's no real actual workflow. They say just spray it, but then if you overspray it, it goes this chalky white. And if you underspray it, it's sticky. This is, I think, where the benefits of milling come from, but it's, again, just the cost of the machine.
Yeah, I agree with you, right? And that's what I said. I think that's one piece to work on. The second thing is also, you got to think about the lifetime, right? How long do you use your CEREC mills that you have in your practice? When's the first one you bought?
At least close to a decade, at least 8 years.
So 8 years and still running, right? You didn't replace it, it's running fine. Printers don't have the same lifetimes as mills, right? So you might be like, yes, it costs more in the beginning, but you actually have it for longer. So I think you also all have to take a little bit of a lifetime perspective. That's the one thing. And the second thing is, what do you get for it, right? So a zirconia crown or a Lisi crown is a better, stronger crown. And you can't get that out of a printer, right? So I think besides the entire workflow thing, there's a question on what's the lifetime value and how much can you also charge for the end result, right? So a mill gives you a more valuable end result, so that gives you more revenue in your practice. Because, I don't think you're putting a lot of composite crowns today. You could.
But nothing stopped.
Yeah, I just personally don't. You're right. Like if I have a mill there, I always have this question because, and I've told the sprint rate guys and a lot of the printing guys, because I want to use their products. But, if I have a patient, I've already cut the same prep and I'm going to design it the same way. The printing crowns have to get so good that I don't feel bad about not just milling an Emax, because I can mill an Emax or a zirconia. And I'm not sure they're there. But, you know what's fascinating? I have to say, Max, it's a real sign of the times how raging this debate has become, because I can remember us talking about it a few years ago, and it was kind of like whatever, printing sucks, but now it's kind of getting serious.
I think printing is a magic technology, don't get me wrong, right? I think it's a great technology for complex temporary applications predominantly, and then it still comes down to, yes, how expensive is the machine, how many machines do you need, how fast is the workflow, how proven is the outcome, right? What's the end crown that you get? How long does it last? How easy is it to place? And how much manual work? So the post-processing is the piece in there. And I think there's a reason why in other industries like aerospace or automotive, printing was introduced, but CNC mills didn't go away, right? So if you just take that as an analogy for dentistry, why would it be different in dentistry?
Yeah, true.
Different technologies enable different types of things. And we shouldn't try to always force a technology on something which is proven to work.
I also agree. Look, to me, when I look at 3D printing and milling, this kind of discussion that goes on and on and on and on, to me, I think you hit the right things. Milling still has the advantage in saying, look, we have materials that have been in the market for decades. Some are decades, literally. We're printing every 6 months. We get a new resin, and we don't know. It's hard to. I really feel sorry for dentists trying to figure this out, because it's hard to really understand what works now in digital dentistry, because the pace of innovation is so fast.
I agree with you, and I think ultimately, since there is so much innovation and it's so hard to sort out, people also revert to what's proven, right? That's what I said. Boring is sexy. And we have to solve for the average dentist and not for the cutting edge dentist who wants the new and shiny thing, right? Because it's dentistry for the masses and not for the few that matters at the end of the day. And I think when you look at material advances in milling as well, you can think about other things that you might be doing, right? If you look at what's the biology of a tooth, right? It's not monolithic one material, right? But there's a softer core in it, the dentin piece, and there's a harder, the enamel around it. Well, maybe blocks need to move into that direction as well, right? That you think about how can you make the block in such a way that it actually emulates a natural tooth even better, right? And then it comes down to, I think, the beauty of, if you compare a block or, let's say, a capsule, the block is industrial manufactured, so it takes the quality control problems, mixing different materials, away from the dental practice. If you're printing, you are doing the industrial process, right? So, and that means you have to ensure the process compliance and so forth. So you can almost think about it with a block, you outsource part of the problem to a manufacturer, and with a resin, you insource that problem into your dental practice. And I think a lot of dentists will be like, well, I'd rather do the first one than the second. And I think that's material advances take time. Resins are faster to innovate, but I don't think that material innovations on milling are over either.
They're slower, though. I have to say that on the milling front, I mean, zirconia has changed a lot. I think we take a lot of things that have happened for granted. That's the issue. Like zirconia generation 1 was garbage, and now look at how nice the zirconia is. So I think a lot of the innovations have happened, and whether or not there's room left, I mean, I feel like the issue with, it's like what you say, the whole boring is sexy. Milling is kind of boring because it hasn't changed for a while, like the milling machines have just been the same for a really long time. You get bigger mills and better spindles and it can change things, but as a whole, mills haven't really changed much. Do you agree?
I mean, no, I think it's more under the hood, so it's not as visible. But if you look at the prime mill and compare to the MCXL, for example, it's night and day, right? I mean, super fast, super fine, the ability to actually mill zirconia in a way that gets comparable to what you can do with an Emax. That's because the mills are better than before, right? And I think there's always been a co-evolution of the materials and the machines. And maybe it's also, I think, important to look back to our discussion at the very beginning, right, when we talked about the value of integration.
Yeah.
The CEREC system is the king of crowns because of its integrated solution. Scan, design, click, 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 mill, done. Right? So it's probably almost the archetype for what outstanding digital solutions should be like in dentistry. And to a certain extent, you can think of DS Core at doing CEREC at scale across every workflow. That's maybe the North Star that's really behind it. Can we make systems that are so easy and so integrated for everything else as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the CAD part is definitely the missing piece that a lot of other companies don't have. Some companies are trying to do them. You'll see a lot of AI CAD. You'll see it's never integrated as well as CEREC. You'll see a lot of other companies trying to make their own AI CAD platforms to kind of solve this, and they're nowhere near as good. I really think the next frontier if you guys really want to crack open the floodgates for chairside dentistry, someone needs to solve this chairside CAD thing. I mean, I know CEREC has done an amazing job, but it's still really intimidating to people. And I feel like this is still a major barrier for people to get into chairside.
Yeah, it's interesting in a sense that I think it's more of a mental barrier than a practical barrier. I give you one example. In Germany, we're running a program that's called Try and Buy. So that means we put a full system into a practice. People can try it out. They commit to doing a certain number of cases, a crown, an inlay, an onlay, and so forth over a certain time frame. Most people who try it end up buying it because it takes away the mystique. Because once you try using it, and I'm sure you see the same in your courses, people are like, this is much easier than I thought.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And I think the barrier of CAD is the one piece, but also if you look at AI crowns, CAD solutions that are out there today, the barrier that they have is that they don't integrate CAD with CAM, right? Because the design is nice, but then you need to transfer that design into a manufacturing environment to actually get to a good outcome. That's why it's called CAD CAM for a reason, right? It's if we want to maintain something which gives you a great end result with an efficient workflow, you have to think both things together and not separate them into silos.
100%. I totally agree. I'm looking at the time, and Max, I could talk to you for hours. We're not done yet, but I need to move on to the next big topic because otherwise this episode will go on for 2-3 hours, and I'm very mindful of your time. Talk to us about this MRI because it's super exciting. I mean, it's obviously not mass market because it costs like $1 million or something. What is it? How much does it cost, Max?
Yeah, but I think ballpark is right. MRIs are an expensive system.
MRI, so obviously not like the everyday dentist thing that we've been talking about, but still, I think fascinating tech. I mean, super fascinating tech for people to understand and at least open their eyes about. So please give us the rundown. What is going on? I mean, I posted a lot about the MRI and some details, but we'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah, so we just got clearance in Europe for a system developed together by us and Siemens Healthineers, and I'm particularly happy about that because I used to work at Siemens many years ago for a long time. So it's really about bringing a new technology into dentistry, right? If you go into a general hospital, you'll see X-rays, ultrasounds, and MRIs, and then you ask yourself, why in dentistry MRI is not being used, right? Because MRI has advantages over CBCTs in a sense that, first of all, it's non-radiating, right? So it doesn't give you any risk of radiation exposure. So that's great, for example, for pediatric dentistry, for monitoring, for all these things, because it takes away that risk, right? People like talking about low dose. This is no dose. The second thing is you can see things in an MRI that you cannot see in a CBCT, because an MRI is able to visualize soft tissue, right? A CBCT ultimately only shows you bone structures, if you will, or the absence of a bone structure. An MRI shows you the actual nerve canal. It's able to show you, is something an acute inflammation or is it scar tissue? You're able to do functional imaging. So if you're thinking about TMJ, for example, that's a big advantage. Now, what are the applications for that? It's if you think about complex implant cases or implant cases in general, peri-implantitis is a real risk. You can rule out peri-implantitis with an MRI, right? Because you'll see, is there inflammation or not? Endo is a big area, right? Because endo is ultimately about inflammations. You can see, is a root canal there? Is there no root canal? Is it dead? Is it not dead? Is it inflamed? Is it not? That's all stuff that you can't see in a CBCT, but you can see in an MRI, right? So there's really a really wide range of clinical benefits that you can explore. It's now starting. We just installed the first commercially sold system in Dortmund in Germany just a few weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And yeah, thank you. And I think there's a real parallel also of how CBCT made its way into dentistry, right? Because CBCT was available in medical imaging already for a while. And then at first was relatively large, bulky systems that went into dental university clinics because they're the ones who could afford them. They wanted to do research on it. You had to start developing the curricula, interpret the images, because an MRI image looks different than a CBCT image. And at first, I think people are sometimes shocked because first of all, they can see things that they can't see in a CBCT, but secondly, it looks kind of more blurry than a CBCT, right? So you'd be like, oh, well, this should be even sharper. But it's a different technology, right? So it's also about learning that. And then it took a few years after universities adopted it to reach the mass market. And we believe that MRI takes a similar path. Now, the system which we now brought out together with Siemens is smaller than usual. It needs much less helium, so it has lower infrastructure requirements because it uses something called dry cooling. So that means you can fit it through regular doors rather than having to do construction to actually open the wall to bring the machine in. You don't need to install vents and ventilation systems on top, right, which would add to the cost and the complexity. And importantly, we developed together with them dental workflows. That means it has a specific coil which focuses just on the mouth, shields out the brain tissue, which dentists are not supposed to see because they're not allowed to diagnose on it, unless they also happen to be a medical doctor. And it focuses on the area of interest, which also allows the workflow to be done in around 15 minutes, right? So you have the clinical applications, you have a system that's much more suitable and easier to integrate, and then has dental-specific workflows so that it actually can make its way into dentistry. And that's, I think, really exciting because it opens up opportunities for better patient care. And the other piece is just like, we think for scanners and x-rays, it's important that they come together in one system. MRI is the next modality, right? Because different images for different purposes, but ultimately you all want them together to start working towards really a digital twin of a patient's mouth.
That's fascinating, man. I feel like we're kind of watching history unfold. You know what I mean? Like in 5-10 years, maybe MRI is going to be, I wouldn't say commonplace in practices, but kind of like what CBCT is now, where people talk about CBCTs openly. You know what I'm saying? So it's fascinating that you guys have pioneered this in dentistry. It really is.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit, we like to think of ourselves as trailblazers, right? We were the first with CEREC, we're the first with digital X-ray, we're one of the first with CBCTs, we're the first to take the leap into a fully cloud native system, we're the first to go into MRI. And of course, if you're pioneering something, it also takes some time for everything to settle. But I think, you can also see that we are still in a position where we set the topic where other people are then following. Cloud is the obvious example. 2 years ago at IDS, nobody else talked about cloud. We were talking about cloud. Now everybody's talking about it. So let's see what happens the next or the over next IDS. Maybe you'll see more MRI there. Maybe you will see other cloud-based scanners or X-ray systems. But I think it's really about moving the practice of dentistry forward. And that can only be done together between practitioners like yourself and industry like us, because we have to think about the patient and the practice of dentistry to make sure that it stays a thriving business.
Inspiring stuff. Now, to wrap up the episode, and you spoke about the future of dentistry and future of IDS, I want to just wrap up with a few thoughts. What do you think is what's hot and what's overhyped right now in dentistry? What's the most exciting thing in dentistry to you? And what do you think is getting a little bit too much attention?
I think printing is getting too much attention. I think
no one guessed that. We couldn't tell. I don't know. I don't know that at all.
I think printing, AI, and patient apps are the three areas that get both too much and too little attention. Too much because there's too much hype and buzz, right? Printing is great for the right applications. AI is great, but AI itself doesn't solve anything. AI for me is a little bit like math. It needs to move to the back. It's an assistant to the practicing dentist. And it's really a question on what gives you the most value to either help you see something faster, do something faster, simplify insurance claims or whatnot. But it also needs to move to the back. And patient apps are very often a big hype. But you see that also from other medical industries. Most patients don't use patient apps because, I don't. Most people don't. They'll be like, yeah. No, and I should be the one using a patient app. It's like, well,
you're the guy. You're the digital tech guy.
Right, but you design them, and then you think about, it's going to give the patient so much transparency and so forth. But if I think about a dental patient app, my analogy is floss. Most patients don't floss, even though you tell them every time, please floss. And the patient sits in the chair and is like, yeah, I'm going to floss for the 3 days before I go next to the dentist. And then I'll forget about it again. The same thing is going to happen with patient apps. It's because unless there's a real urgency, they have something that's really specific, I don't think that's going to be a thing. And I think underhyped is, I said it, boring is the new sexy. Look at what moves the needle for everyday dentistry. What's bread and butter? Prevention, hygiene, restoration, those are the things that matter. And I think endo gets under looked at because endo is actually a really important procedure. It's very profitable for a practicing dentist to do that well. And ultimately, you want to fix patient problems and have a running practice. And all on fours are not what keeps the lights on in your practice or keeps your patients coming. It's a nice add-on.
You heard it from the man himself, Max Milz, the head of the global business unit at Dentsply Sirona. Max, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. You're a busy guy, man. You're going through so much with, building DS-Core and the team and everything, and just come off IDS. So I really appreciate you spending this hour with me. I really do.
Ahmad, it's been really great. Looking forward to the next time. And I hope to see you again soon.
Me too, my friend, me too. That is another episode of the Digital Dentistry Decoded podcast, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, follow us, share it with your friends. It helps us out a lot. And to keep up to date with everything digital dentistry, go to instituteofdigitaldentistry.com. Thanks for listening.